Okay, so objective realism. Why do we care? What the hell is it? So, as I mentioned before, I started with the premise of maybe the ancients knew something that we didn't, that we don't, that we lost knowledge. And so part of this process is the recovery of lost knowledge. They call it esotericism, which is to be hidden. This is hidden knowledge, and it's been encoded in many of the ancient texts. I get into that a lot in Homo Mysticus. And there is sort of a revelatory aspect here, just in terms of being able to reveal. And what you find in these ancient texts is not only sort of a basic cosmogony, a fundamental structure of how the universe came into being, but it's also, you can not only see the structure reinforced, but the part of the evidence of the structural nature of the universe, this matrix that we live in, for lack of a better term, is the sacred geometry that you find that basically underpins how the universe looks and how it's structured and how things come into being and how they behave. And this is how the physics stems out of this sacred geometry. In fact, sacred geometry fundamentally is physics. It's the math, it's the numerology, it's the basic geometry, the platonic solids, and the sphere of life, seed of life, tree of life. These sort of basic geometrical patterns, numerological and otherwise, and it basically is the structure of reality. So, like, again, you got to let the religious stuff go. You're an engineer. You're trying to figure out how the shit works so you can figure out how to tune it. That's really what we're doing here. It's a tuning exercise, right? It's really not much, it's complicated because the system's complicated, but it's a tuning exercise. And we're in a grid. And each of us is part of the grid. And you can tap right into the grid. You can. There are specific techniques for it. They've been well documented, well tested. You can tap right into the grid. But we're trying to tune the grid so that a lot of this anxiety and a lot of this anger and resentment, and just everybody just needs to relax a little bit. But we have a collective responsibility to build a better world. It's not just going to happen. God's not going to come down and, fix everything. Or the worst thing that he can do, what he might do, is he might just throw the whole thing into fucking chaos, which he's done a couple of times before. Also well documented. We don't want that to happen. That would be bad. Trust me, that would be bad. But we gotta fix it. So how do you do that? I don't know. I don't know what everybody's supposed to do. All I know is that for some reason I got some voice inside my head, and I wrote all these books, and I researched all this stuff to try and figure this out so that I can tell you about it. So you could know, so we could know, and then somehow build a better future, right? That's the idea. Again, I'm not quite sure how that's going to occur, but it's happening. We're laying some of that groundwork now. Technology innovation is there. The infrastructure is there. Now the ideas are starting to come out. So now, we basically have put the scaffolding up, and So this is my first book, Snow Cone Diaries. See the bridge? It's the Manhattan Bridge. Under construction, 19th century or something, 1900 or something. So this book starts out with Charlie and the Bridge, The Chasm Calls, the first chapter. And based on a dream that I had. This bridge. And there was a whole bunch of people in this bridge in the clouds. You can't, you're in the middle of the sky, up in the clouds. There's nothing there. It's just some scaffolding and some stuff behind you. We're laying down planks. There's a couple of others around us. And I'm terrified of heights, by the way. Terrified. And I'm on the top of this bridge laying planks and putting stuff down. That's this. Snow Cone Diaries. That's what we're doing. But don't ask me why. Don't ask me how. Don't ask me maybe it's a figment of my imagination. Who knows? But that's what it feels like we're supposed to be doing. And let me me tell you something. When I don't trust this voice inside my head, for whatever, it's a terrible way to call it, but my higher self, sometimes he's pretty annoying. And I can hear him. He thinks he's driving the bus. If I don't listen to him, my life is miserable. I can tell you that. So, you just learn. It's like trial and error. It's like you're trying to line up and harmonize the system, and like eventually you get it right, and you're like, oh, okay, now I understand. And that's what we're doing on sort of a collective level. So, I get into sort of this sort of ancient shamanic, and Mircea Eliade writes a lot about ancient shamanic eternal return and sort of cosmogonies and sort of this sort of way of thought that he sort of ferrets out of ancient tribal kind of nomadic tribes, which seems to be, again, in that Eurasian geography, seems to be a pretty consistent pattern of development. There's a bunch of books that were just written about cave art, ancient cave art, and some mushrooms, mushroom rituals seated at the root of Gnostic Christianity, and the mystery traditions of ancient Greece. There's a lot of that material that's been put forward, which is interesting and fascinating. But you don't need the mushrooms. Like these guys are getting a little obsessed about the mushrooms. Like they are helpful, but it's like you have this sort of higher order dimensional reality, and then you have the human form and the physical reality, and then and you have all sorts of bridges that go from one to the other, and so mushrooms and other substances can help you get there, but like that's not the only way. Don't get obsessed about that, and they're not meant to be used exclusively, and they're not meant to be used all the time. So there's other practices that Patanjali and others outline, Buddhists, the Eightfold Path, that talk specifically about how you build the structure morally, ethically, and then physically, and to build the structure such that you can channel and plug into these higher level dimensional realities. These plug into higher levels of the grid. Level up. Right? So, anyway, so the philosophical tradition crops up in the middle of the first century BCE, and from that you end up with these sort of great monotheistic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and then Islam, particularly in the West, and then the Far Eastern and Indian cultures develop. You call it similar mindsets, but they're different symbols. They're independent cultures. The Vedic one I've studied both, all of them now at this point. But so you out of this you have this sort of essential. The Chinese talk about the earth, man, and heaven as a sort of a triumvirate from a metaphysical standpoint, and it's their interrelationship that basically sits at the heart of their system of metaphysics that they developed, which is in the I Ching, this book of changes, which is still consulted and used today. 64 different symbols, hexagrams, okay? So all sorts of numerological significance based in that. Leibniz looked at it and said, well, fuck, they built a binary system. He built the same thing at the beginning of the Enlightenment. A great mathematician. And so the math is buried right into the system. It's not separate from it. This is part of what I'm trying to tell you. It's like, it's not this spiritual. No, it's built into the fabric of what's going on here. It's the reason why I can still communicate to you, is because all this shit actually works. So you got these fibered network packets going back and forth between me and you, stored on these massive servers somewhere in the cloud. The reason why that works is because these things are true. Because the universe has a fundamental geometric and numerological order to it. Why is that? Because the geometry is embedded straight into the cosmos, into its very core, as Plato tried to kind of tease out with these Platonic solids, but something there's much more sophisticated infrastructure than that, and because it's based on light, and information and consciousness. And, that's the primordial entity that drives the cosmos. And in our physical reality, it feels hard and fast. But really, and this is what Einstein found, is that energy and mass are basically totally equivalent. Well, how just think about that. E equals mc squared. They're equivalent, and their equivalence is based upon the speed of light, a fundamental constant that seems to be buried in the Great Pyramids. It's like, why? Is that true? I think I know the answer to that. But you need to stop and think about that, because it's not. It tells you everything you need to know. It takes the religion off the table. No, there's a structure here that we participate in and partake in and are part of and are integrally related to. And if you can understand that, again, you're in a much better position to tune it and know what it is that you're dealing with here. You know what kind of instrument you have there. We are made in the image of God. Like that. Okay, so that's in the Bible. So everybody's like, whatever. They don't know what they're talking about. It's creationists. Your body is your temple. This is what Jesus tells us too, right? Okay. Take the religion out of it, and what are you being told? You are a creator. Not figuratively, literally. You are a creator. And you have been given an instrument of creation. Perhaps one of the most amazing and miraculous instruments ever created in the history of the cosmos. Seriously, like people talk about these instruments and I can see really far or whatever. The human form that's been created somehow, here we are to experience reality, to experience other people and making love and going on a run and going on a hike and sunsets and rainbows. It's a miracle. It's nothing less than a miracle. I keep meaning to talk about objective realism, but I keep getting sidetracked. That seems to happen a lot to me. So, what comes out of this ancient period, okay, of the first millennium BCE, this philosophical revolution, okay, is the old world starts to fade away. Civilization starts to emerge and become more complicated. People become more focused on, bartering economics, way of life. They become sedentary, and a lot of the things that they searched and prayed for, whether it's food or shelter, they don't have to worry about some of those things anymore. So they start to think about things a little bit differently. And different philosophical systems start to emerge, whether it's Stoicism or Platonism or, on the other side, Confucianism or Taoism. These isms start to emerge in the middle of the first millennium BCE. And certainly in the West, that becomes supplanted by Christianity with Constantine in the 4th century CE and whatnot. So there's about a 700, 800 period of development in between there, where, the Greeks had primary influence certainly throughout the Mediterranean and the Near East. And as such, it's really the Greek philosophical tradition that comes in, Stoicism in particular, that dovetails into early Christianity and Judaism, of course. And that sort of this system emerges, and then out of that system of Christianity, it forks at around 500 CE with Muhammad. But they're all Abrahamic religions. Like everybody just needs to really appreciate that. Like they have different positions on what they think that Jesus may or may not have been, but like they all go back to Abraham. They're all brothers. So like everybody needs to fucking stop fighting. Like particularly the Palestinian and the Israeli stuff. I mean, the Israelis need to settle down and understand that they're their cousins and their brothers that they have in these encampments, more or less. And the other side needs to stop shooting rockets and trying to kill Israelis. So, but it starts with the understanding that you're brothers. and you're connected. And that's what I want to get into, because the very inverse of that is what we have been taught. And that's what objective realism is. You have sort of a metaphysics of awareness, which is what I call it. Just this idea that, we're all fundamentally connected on a basic energetic level, physically. And then you have objective realism, which is energy is a consequence of, mass in some way. And that really what's real is this table and this monitor and the screen. That's real. But the spirit? Maybe not. But they got it reversed. But it's not by accident that it's been reversed. It's intentionally set up that way. That much I know is true. I'm not going to get into all the potential conspiracy as to why it's been set up like that. But you basically have had over the millenniums this knowledge that I'm sharing with you, this ancient sacred secret, has been encoded and buried in all these ancient texts, but people don't get taught this stuff. For whatever reason, I became fascinated with the Upanishads when I was young. Ended up studying at the Ramakrishna Center in New York, and was initiated by the head minister there, Swami Adiswarananda, rest in peace. And I was initiated into these mysteries, more or less. And it takes a while to, some the way the mysteries are said, the illusion mysteries, which I just read about, is that they think that there was some sort of hallucinogenic substance that they would give you, and then you would have sort of, they take you through a hall, and there was a whole kind of transformation experience, and people, it was coming out, sort of a passage into the realm of the spirit, which they do in the Native American cultures too. They go into the tent sweat lodges, and they, peyote. It's the same sort of idea, this kind of coming of age. So the illusion mysteries and some of the other mystery schools in ancient Greece, they sort of indoctrinated and sort of systematized some of these things. There was some bleeding and sharing with some of the mystery traditions in ancient Egypt as well. We know Pythagoras studied there. And my monitor is going a little bit crazy right now. That's what happens sometimes in the morning. I start having these electrical stuff going on. Anyway, and these traditions were all killed when Christianity took hold. All these pagan traditions were destroyed. The Nag Hammadi library, the Gnostic texts and stuff like that. All those guys, why do you think those guys were hiding out in caves? Because they were probably trying to kill them. So, but now we're in a place where knowledge is everywhere. And so you start to have this awakening. That's where we are. So, on the one hand, you have this idea of energy being fundamental. And as such, there's a connection between life, earth, us as humans, which have a special place in this system, and then sort of a collective unconscious, and then sort of a cosmic consciousness on top of that, right? So, and that metaphysical structure, which is what that is, that's not theology, okay? Even though that's where I put most of the studies in the antiquity around that's the metaphysical structure of reality, has been known and understood, well understood, since we have written records. It's in the Upanishads, it's in certainly it's in the I Ching, okay? It's in the Neoplatonic texts, Plotinus and Porphyry and others. They're well documented, and that there seems to be a relationship with some of the Gnostic writings too, John, and potentially Revelation. Those Gnostic teachings and writings. And I think some of the Revelation, I don't want to get too much into, but I think some of that is the ascension through the 7 chakras, the 7 horses. And so there's an opening of the the chakras there, and I think that he's akin to the wheel and the horse. Ooh, the wheel and the horse is a very consistent imagery both in the Upanishads. We find it in some of the ancient Platonic dialogues too, and sort of that idea I think is built into Revelation, and I think that's what we're going through a little bit now, is trying to build that structure. That revelation of the knowledge of how we are truly architected, and how that kind of comes to be, and that's a process of transformation fundamentally, right? And objective realism is the very opposite of that, which is that energy is like, can't measure it. It's it's subjective. I'm not really sure. I have got to be able to measure something, and I've got to be able to repeat that measurement phenomenon in an experiment. And from that, science emerges, but only if the data is consistent and I can measure it and I can repeat it and I can put it in a box in an experiment. That's science today. The only thing that's real is the object. We perceive the object, but the objective world is real. The subjective world, the world of the mind, is psychology. It's a bunch of crazies. Sorry, it's not science. The humanities. Over there. And if you're in that mindset, you're stuck. And if you live out of that mindset, you end up where we are today. People chasing the next great thing, the next great party, the next great girl, the next great boy, the nice cars. It's endless. And look, I can say that because, Lord willing, at least food on the table, I'm able to take care of my family, okay. And I know there's people that are struggling there for a meal and whatnot, but we should, as humanity right now, we should be able to solve those problems. Those are solvable problems. That's what we should be focused on, to lift people up. And I think some of that stuff is starting to happen, but it's like any change. It's gonna rock the boat a little bit. And so this objective realism not only comes out of that philosophical revolution, this religious revolution, and then the Enlightenment revolution, which basically claims God shit is fucking nonsense. Tired of them telling us what we can believe. The earth revolves around the sun. We are not the center of the universe. That's why Copernicus' discovery is so important. And then in the philosophical tradition, you have Kant, who basically says, well, there's not much we can say about the world because everything has to be perceived by our senses. So what the world is, I don't know. I can tell you about how I perceive the world. And that's Kant's inversion, which turns out to be very, very accurate and true. And I spend a lot of time with him trying to adapt his work to more modern Gnostic principles about, this sort of energy grid that we're part of. And so what you see coming out of the Enlightenment and where we are today is this obsession with, the hard sciences as this sort of what Robert Pearson calls the citadel of science, scientism, this religion of scientism, which is, all this spiritual stuff is nonsense. And whatever, you guys study that, but in science, we're going to focus on this here, and but it's not just that they're going to focus on it. That's what they teach everybody. I got kids in school right now, right? There's like a political agenda behind half this stuff, and it's like they don't teach you how to behave necessarily as they used to do, right, in antiquity in terms of ethics and morality. They don't teach any of that stuff. I don't want to touch on that. That's the government steps in and says, no, you can't teach them that. Where people running around today with no sense of respect or ethics, what their place is in society. Many of us have lost that notion. We think we write a check to a charity and we're done. And by the way, I'm just as bad of an offender as everybody else. I feel like my task is to try and help people intellectually understand what's going on. I feel like that's my task, and I'm going to do that for the good of everybody, because not everybody has to go through this intellectual exercise, A, but B, everybody needs to really fully appreciate and understand what's actually going on, which is what I'm trying to teach here a little bit. And so, then I'll close here in a couple of minutes, but everything we know about physics today, all the data, if you spend not even a lot of time, but you spend a decent amount of time studying, all the data indicates that we are fundamentally connected, not only with each other, with the planet, and with something else that's of cosmic origin. And by cosmic, I mean embedded into the very fabric of the universe itself. Man is, in fact, created in the image of God in a way that's just sort of mind-blowing. And you don't necessarily need to understand that completely or partake of this mind-blowingness, like people running around searching for a spiritual experience. No, it's just recognize that you're a part of it. But in recognizing that, there's a certain level of understanding, appreciation, and ultimately responsibility that you have to try not to fuck things up. And I think, and I'm not sure of this, but I think that we've done that a couple of times. And so this time around, I think that they've doubled down trying to make sure that we don't screw this up. And so the retention and the preservation of this world, in fact, is the responsibility of our generation. We got to put the structure in place somehow, so what we have is sustainable for souls and spirits and people to come and be in this amazing, miraculous place. Go back to the garden, right? Anyway, we'll stop here. Thanks for if you've come this far, Godspeed, right? And peace. Namaste.